Hi, good afternoon. You're welcome to Town Meeting TV's Under the Dome, where we're going to bring you inside the state legislature via the folks who serve there on behalf of their communities. And I'm here joined today by Rep. Troy Hedrick, who is in his second term, serving as the ranking member on the Corrections and Institutions Committee. Troy works at the UVM Center for Student Conduct and has a background in higher ed, municipal government, and small business.
I did have a small business for a while.
Yeah. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we are also joined by Rep. Brian Minier, also on the Corrections and Institutions Committee, who's also serving in his second term in the legislature. He has a background in languages, worked at UVM in the Russian and German department, and you left the South Burlington School Board to join the legislature.
All true.
Correct? Yeah.
Yep.
So welcome to you both.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if there's more that you want to add to your intro, what drives you to be serving in the legislature?
I can bat if you want. Do you care?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
For my part, it was essentially volunteerism. It was the same as being on the school board. I know sometimes people have always wanted to be a politician or, have some particular issue they want to take care of or address. And I had never set foot in the State House. I had never thought about it. But as my kids got older, I had a little more time to serve my community, and that started, with little stuff like coaching kids in soccer. And then the next thing I knew, it was the school board. And my work there, I guess, got me noticed locally. And so when my predecessor, John Kalacki, stepped down a few years ago, I was thought of as a person who might succeed him. And it's been really interesting work. It's been really difficult work. I'm glad to be doing it. But yeah, that's the reason for being there, just a chance to serve the community.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, similarly, I never anticipated that I would do anything like this, I've never run for any elected position prior to this. My predecessor, Selena Colburn, asked, and she kept me on the phone and did a good job of convincing me that this might be a good thing to do. Similar to Brian, my kids are grown and out of the house. I have been incredibly fortunate in my district to always have been represented by people that I don't have to worry about, right? Their views and their issues aligned with mine really well. And started realizing that there's probably an obligation to service for those of us who can get there. It's a hard place to go for folks who you have to be able to afford to get there.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate to be in a double income family and in a position at UVM that is incredibly gracious. My colleagues who cover for me when I'm gone. So
yeah, a lot of folks don't know that. You're basically volunteers. You have a stipend and a small amount, and it's a non-professional legislature.
Yeah.
So you don't have staff.
Right.
You're relying on community members and lobbyists to tell you the truth. And
Very much so, yeah. And we do have a wonderful staff of folks at Legislative Council and at the Joint Fiscal Office to support us in our work. But there's no desk, there's no office, there's no locker. It's just you in the committee room. Yeah. I like it though.
Let's talk about the committee room. So tell us a little bit about what's the role of corrections in institutions. What's your charge? What's your purview?
Sort of a dual function committee. We do policy work for the Department of Corrections. So any policy that touches corrections, it comes through our committee. And then we also, the institutions portion of our committee, we're the committee that constructs the capital bill. It's a 2-year, it's essentially the state's credit card. We do all the funding for infrastructure needs of state buildings and other state facilities.
Yeah, you have a kind of dual role of very pragmatic, utilitarian buildings and grounds, or mainly buildings.
Yep, grounds
and
and
then
monuments.
This
and
other
you name
realm
it.
of corrections, which is a place where you can dig into the meat of how we're working with humans that are living through the correction system.
Right, precisely.
Yeah, I'll say for my part, it's been sort of a learning experience. My whole time in the legislature has been, but I was on a different committee. I was on education my first biennium. So I'm now in my second year on committee with Troy doing corrections and institutions. And in my previous work, I've done budgets, I've done spreadsheets, I've done databases, but not just doing corrections policy, but then getting into this $40 million budget and trying to figure out where money needs to go if projects are getting out the door. It's a very different part of the brain, and so it's been interesting, this sort of split bailiwick, you know.
When we go to the House, and on the House side, so many bills that are coming through your committee, so many possible bills, but we are now past crossover. So can you give us a quick rundown of what's made it through crossover that you're watching through onto the other side, and what are you seeing coming through from the Senate side that you're paying attention to? And do you have, is there a number of bills that you passed through? Yeah,
I'm actually really pleased with how the committee showed up, especially this year, the second year of the biennium, in and around corrections policy. I'll start last year we passed through an expansion of the Kids Apart program. This is the program that the Lund Center puts together for keeping incarcerated, it has been incarcerated women exclusively in contact with their kids and keeping those connections robust. And we passed last year an expansion of that to one of the men's facilities, acknowledging that there are plenty of incarcerated men who are also parents and who also need to maintain those connections. That was last year, signed. It's up and running in our northern facility. This year, again, the committee, I was really, really pleased with how they showed up in and around some bills that I introduced. And we have so far out of our committee, out of the House committee, we have passed a bill that eliminates supervisory fees. So folks who are on probation, parole, furlough, up until, well, it's still technically the bill hasn't passed, have to pay a monthly supervisory fee. And that to me feels exploitive of the people who can probably least afford it. So we passed a bill that eliminates those supervisory fees. We passed a bill out of the House that expanded the access to driver's licenses for people who are leaving incarceration to include those who have been just detained for up to 6 months. I'm really proud of a bill, and I can talk in more detail about it, that improves the rights of transgender Vermonters who are incarcerated. Applies some deliberate protocols for housing transgender incarcerated Vermonters, and ideally will move into medical care as well. We have to do a little more work on that.
When you say you have to do a little more work on that?
We ran out of time before crossover to get the medical components fine-tuned, so we passed it over to the Senate. We kind of put a bookmark in the bill. We're talking about taking some testimony now to maybe get the Senate to add that to it. Yeah.
So that's sort of 3 bills. Can you give us what's the number of bills that passed out of, is it 18 or?
Out of our committee?
Yeah.
It's not that.
Can't be that high. Yeah.
No, there's the capital bill, which is the 2-year budget, and then this year the adjustment to that bill.
Right.
And then maybe an additional 6 bills.
I was going to say in the neighborhood of 7 or 8. Yeah.
What stands out in your mind in terms, Rep. Minier, about this session and what you discussed?
Well, I guess there are a couple of things that I would add to what Troy was just talking about. The first one is federal money has gone away, and we're dealing with a new federal administration too. So it's the end of the COVID era stimulus. It's also a new national scene. For all of that, Vermont does remain different from how things work in Washington. And so we have an 11-person committee. If you're looking at how people are affiliated by party, we're split pretty much down the middle. And yet, we work really well together with a wide diversity of viewpoints. And typically when bills come out of our committee, they're 11-0. I think that's a tribute to the work that we do together. And I think a lot of that rests at the top of the table with our chair, Alice Emmons, out of Springfield, who's been there for more than 40 years. So she knows what she's doing. The other thing is, when you're looking at corrections policy, there is some money involved in these initiatives that we're doing, but a lot of it, it's less about spending money and it's more about the correct way of running things. And if there's a through line to the legislation that we've been passing out of the committee, it's looking at how do you properly rehabilitate people? How do you make what is a necessary part of society work a little bit better so that it's doing what it's supposed to do, which is not just to sequester, but also to hopefully improve. And for the people who are working there too, by the way. But
it's interesting that you bring up that so many of your bills are passed unanimously out of committee.
Out of committee, yeah.
And, Do you feel like your committee, you mentioned some alignment, but is there a mission or an underlying charge that you feel like you share together?
Yeah, I think all the way from the furthest left member to the furthest right member, and again, it's a pretty wide spectrum, there is a desire to have this process, this necessary part of what we do, improve people. I think there is a desire for rehabilitation. I think there is a desire to decrease recidivism. I think we're all working together towards that goal. And so, yeah, in other parts, when you get to the whole chamber, you know, there can be politicking and there can be grandstanding, but I've seen relatively little of that in our committee, and we're often pulling in the same direction, which I think is really cool. It's been fun to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, and when we do disagree, we do it well. We don't. I don't mind sitting next to people that I disagree with, and there's some significant disagreements, but we come out of it on the other side committed to maintaining the relationship, and that building runs on relationships. So absolutely, I agree with Brian was saying that. I think in some ways our committee is a bit unique, and agree with Brian as well that I give the chair a lot of credit for how she runs our committee. Yeah.
I'm wondering, you know, for corrections and institutions, at least on the Department of Corrections side, on that, where you're really dealing with what we would consider sort of end of the line, people who have reached
Sure.
the, you know, they've hit that wall, or they're being held accountable for, or they are experiencing the results of their own trauma or history of substance abuse, mental health issues. What is your view about where Vermont should be paying attention and putting resources and energy that they're not, to sort of move into not just a response but a prevention side?
I will say that.
And if my premise is wrong,
No.
Oh, it's right.
The other thing that I'll add to that is we have a unified correction system, meaning we house both folks who have been sentenced and folks who are waiting to be sentenced. So our detained population is...
we don't have jail.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And about half of our population, and we're incredibly overcrowded in our correctional facilities. We send 150 people down to Mississippi,
Yeah.
men down to Mississippi to accommodate the numbers.
So that number is growing. It hasn't been
It has, yeah.
shrinking.
Right.
Oh, that's so
Precisely,
interesting, because
yeah.
we were working on shrinking that.
Yeah.
That was a goal
Yeah.
that hasn't happened. Okay.
And it hasn't.
And that was true ahead of COVID and to some degree into COVID, and it's been climbing again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to your point, that it's kind of the end of the road, corrections houses who's ever given to them, right? They have to house them, whether that's detainees or sentenced folks. And to the point that I think you might be making, when our other systems are failing us, the mental health system, the addiction recovery system, it shouldn't surprise us. When we don't invest upstream in those systems, it shouldn't surprise us that more and more people are being handed over to corrections. We've got a bill right now that we're working on that Brian and I could probably talk in great detail about how corrections is often seen as the easy place to send these folks. And I think that's incredibly unfortunate. And I don't think it serves a rehabilitative system in any way whatsoever.
Yeah, and
let's
so,
talk about that a little bit.
well, to get there, I think there's a way that Troy and I can work as members in the larger 150-person House to try to change policy in other areas, but ultimately we are dealing with corrections and what happens to us in a way. And so I guess a couple of things to say. First of all, we've talked about people being detained as opposed to sentenced. I believe that's more than half of the population now is detained, right? They haven't had
I don't know
their
if
day
it's
in
more
court.
than, it's pretty
But
close.
right around
Probably
half.
more than half in the women's facility.
Because of corrections backlogs, or
Because of the judiciary backlog.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And the House has made proposals for budgets previously that have upstaffed the judiciary so that we could deal with the backlog. Those budgets were then dismissed with by the governor, and we did not do that to the degree that we might have. Even if that were to happen, you still have to deal with it on the corrections end. We're overcrowded in all of our facilities. The women's one in particular, we just toured a few of our different facilities. First the women's in South Burlington, then in St. Albans, the men's, and then most recently down in Springfield. all of them are overcrowded. The women's is probably the worst, and because they're doing some work right now to retrofit for ADA accommodations, there are people sleeping in, they call them sled beds, on the floor of the gym, right? So it's sometimes 5 to a cell that's meant for 2. I mean, these are far from ideal circumstances.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about this bill? That's sort of like, how do we push this conversation back into
You want to start with me too?
Um,
So this
back
is
to the roots?
This is S-189. This is a bill that came over from the Senate, and it is attempting to do and create a program that we desperately need in Vermont, and it's a competency restoration program.
Can you say that again?
Competency restoration.
Okay.
So, and it's creating a forensics program, a forensics facility, and a forensics facility houses folks who have been either found not guilty by reasons of insanity or have been found not competent to stand trial. And that competency component is fluid, right? You can be perhaps competent, you know how to engage with your attorney, you know what how the court systems works. You can possibly be competent one day and then lose that competency another for a myriad of reasons. And it's not always...
That's not a large number of people right now, right?
It's not, no. And it's not always mental health issues, right? It could be developmental disabilities, it could be a traumatic brain injury, it could be autism or dementia, right? All of these reasons why people might not be able to engage with the court system. And we don't have a place to house these folks. And we can't house them at like the secure residential facility in Essex. We can't house them at the mental health hospitals because they risk losing Medicaid dollars if we do that. Medicaid dollars cannot be used to fund a forensics facility. So the solution, in addition to creating sort of the substance of a competency restoration program, a forensics program, is to house them in corrections. And I am philosophically, that's a non-start for me. I can't understand why we would place folks either who have been found not guilty in a correctional facility or who need significant treatment, therapeutic treatment. Our correctional facilities are not therapeutic. So we're wrestling right now with the administration about if we're going to create a forensics facility, a forensics program, where are we going to house them? And I think there's a wide sort of burgeoning opinion that we can't do this within the Department of Corrections. And we're understaffed with the Department of Corrections, and this would be asking a lot of our corrections officers to play that role for this population.
So sort of to build on what Troy was talking about, I did watch some of your previous interviews. I know that you spoke with Martin Lalonde and Barbara Rachelson from Judiciary previously, so you, and perhaps your viewers know that this is a bill that's being looked at by 4 committees on the House side. There's Judiciary, there's Corrections and Institutions, there's also Healthcare and Human Services. And they all bring sort of a different light to this. From our perspective, it's sort of, if you were to make this work, what would it look like? And we have a new Commissioner of Corrections, John Murad, who was formerly the Burlington Chief of Police. To me, I think he's still looking at corrections a little bit as a police officer would, not knowing exactly what's happening on the back end. And his testimony was that by providing therapy, you have created a therapeutic environment. I think 5 minutes in any one of our facilities would convince you otherwise. And it's trying to bring all of those different viewpoints to some sort of consensus that moves us forward, because there is an agreement that we absolutely need some way of dealing with this population that is secure, that is humane. There have been previous attempts that have failed. Something has to happen, but what is it? It's not what's being proposed to us, I don't think, and I don't think Troy thinks either, and I believe that'll be the consensus on our committee, but something needs to be done.
Yeah. I have just a random question. Why is it called the forensics facility?
I don't have a good answer for you.
I believe the etymology is from Latin. It's the forum, and so you must prove your case in front of the forum. And so you have folks in a forensic facility because you're trying to get them to a place where evidence can be produced.
Got it.
To have your
It has,
day in court.
has Latin roots. Thank you. Or language.
A language nerd, you can say it, yeah.
Language guy. Yeah. You mentioned John Murad.
Yes.
You're both familiar with from
Troy perhaps more intimately, yes.
from being former Burlington Chief of Police, who's now taken over leadership of Department of Corrections.
Yep.
And One of the things that we think about in Vermont often, well, that's different, is that corrections is located within the Agency of Human Services.
Yep.
And this is brought up to talk about how Vermont really does things differently. So tell us a little bit, as much as you can, about your, how do we live up to that expectation, and is our current leadership moving in that direction?
I can go quickly before you, or I can wait for you.
No,
Okay.
go ahead. Yeah.
I think the quick one is I was pleased to learn that, right, this is still my first term on corrections institutions. I'm learning a fair bit about how everything works. And I was sort of delighted to learn that we in Vermont have placed corrections in the Agency of Human Services, thinking that would mean that we're taking a more enlightened approach to rehabilitation and what we're doing with folks who are in the custody of the state. In fact, when we've taken testimony from the administration recently, and by that I mean folks from DOC, I mean folks from AHS, various others too actually, there's not always one hand talking to the other. There's not always a clean system working in unison. And for this forensic facility to work, if it were to be housed within the Department of Corrections, which again, I don't think it should be, that would have to be happening, and it's not. And so I guess I'm not given a lot of comfort by the fact that it is under AHS here, where I thought I would have been before these 2 years. The other thing is, I think I've heard Commissioner Murad a few times on camera in testimony suggest that things are going pretty well, or as well as they could, that the healthcare in our facilities is superior to what folks who are detained or incarcerated would be getting elsewhere, sort of a three hots in a cot kind of mentality. And I don't think that's sufficient. I don't think that's the goal. But corrections is often the place where you seek to save a buck whenever funds get tight. So I need to see more from the new commissioner and from the agency as a whole.
Yeah, similarly, philosophically, I think it's incredibly admirable that we have the Agency of Human Services providing oversight to the Department of Corrections. I, similar to Brian, see some silos within that agency that are preventing some of the cross-collaboration that could really push us there. You don't have to look very far at all on my public statements in and around what I feel, how I feel the current Commissioner of Corrections functioned as the Chief of Police in Burlington. So I came into this relationship skeptical, and I remain skeptical, trying to do that professionally and diplomatically. I think corrections in general, I think in this country, nationally, has some significant improvements to be made to it. I think Vermont might be ahead of that curve, but it's going to take a relentless and sort of commitment to making sure that we do this correctly. I'm a huge believer in restorative practices. I think we can incorporate that into our Department of Corrections in ways that we are not doing right now. I want to say I am incredibly grateful for the staff that we do have working. For example, as we were working on the bill to improve conditions for transgender incarcerated folks, we were partnered with the Department of Corrections all along the way, and I was incredibly grateful for the input that they provided and the sincere commitment that I hear coming from them in improving that aspect of our correctional facility. I'm incredibly grateful for our correctional officers who are working sometimes 16-hour shifts, sometimes 2 16-hour shifts in a row. Mm-hmm. We're incredibly short-staffed, and our corrections officers are not, they're showing up, right? They're not checking out. And I need to see more from the commissioner on recruitment and retention of those staff members to give the overworked ones a well-needed break.
One of the things, again, back to the question of jail, and we don't have a jail, which is the place that people go when they haven't been tried.
Yeah.
Or charged, or they've been charged but haven't been tried. And we're seeing folks who are being picked up by ICE ending up in our facilities. And I'm assuming that this conversation has hit this committee as well. And how is your committee viewing the question ICE involvement in Vermont and detentions in
That is huge.
That's a big can.
facilities.
Yeah.
I'll start with one facet. I think there are several, and I'll try to keep it to one so Troy gets to talk too. One thing to say is that Vermont has a contract with the feds saying that we will hold these individuals when they're brought in by ICE or by Border Patrol. We, as a committee, were looking into the possibility of either ending that contract last year or letting it expire. And to me, very interestingly, we had in advocacy groups like the Vermont Asylum Assistance Project, like the ACLU Vermont, saying, no, actually, we would like you to continue this contract because the folks who are detained will stand a better chance in the Vermont judicial system than they would if they were whisked away elsewhere. And to me, that smacked a little bit of collaboration. But if that's going to produce a better result for these folks, then that's what we're doing. So there's.
And that was borne out possibly with some of the folks.
Oh,
Holmes and
March
Madawi
11th on
and,
Dorset Street. Yeah.
Well, in terms of folks who, if they had gone to Boston or other
Right.
detention facilities.
And some of our migrant
We're
justice individuals who have been detained. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just going to leave it at that one and defer to Troy. There's plenty to talk about.
Right, so that's kind of where we ended last year, where we deferred to VAP and to ACLU and said, okay, let's try this. We started this year then with a pretty significant gap in perceptions between the advocacy groups and the department. Advocacy groups were telling us we are not getting the access that we need to the folks who need legal assistance, folks who have been detained by ICE in particular. That looks like being turned away when we show up. That looks like not having access to translation services that are necessary. Heard that wasn't necessarily the case from the Department of Corrections, so we spent probably a couple weeks trying to close that gap in perception. Like, why is the department saying this? Why are the advocacy groups saying this? Where is the truth of the matter? As it turns out, we as a committee wrote a letter of expectation to the department saying it is our expectation that you are going to meet these services in these ways. Kind of got our hands slapped by the governor, who said that we were overstepping our legislative role. Nonetheless, testimony as recently as last week indicates that language services have improved. The department has now in place, especially at the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility and St. Albans, where ICE detainees are most likely to be held for any duration. They have a collection of iPads that have immediate access to language translation, person on the other line, in-person translation services.
Yeah.
Yep. Haven't heard back from ACLU and VAP yet as to whether or not that matches their perspective. When we were touring, we saw some of these tablets and some handheld translation devices and talked to staff members who had started using them, and that's encouraging. So what started as a significant gap at the start of this session, I'm hoping has closed a little bit. Our numbers of ICE detainees have been holding steady, and that is in part due to capacity issues. Both of the facilities that accepts ICE detainees do have an ability to say no when we're at capacity, and we are beyond capacity. So.
And then where do folks go?
Yeah, not
Do you
in
know
Vermont.
where they go?
I don't.
Somewhere
no.
outside.
Yeah, New
the
Hampshire,
state.
Boston,
Yep.
Louisiana, Texas.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can we just circle back quickly to this, the bill that you were referring to that supports transgender Vermonters? Tell us what's the impact of that bill, or what are some of what differences
It's
it
got a
going to
great
make?
origin story if I can
Okay.
spend a little bit of time. So this past summer, I got an email from a woman out of the blue, said, hey, this is, I'm not going to name her. She identifies, the story is hers to tell, not mine, but she said, I just got out, had spent 15, 16 years in our correctional facilities, almost exclusively in our male facilities, and almost exclusively out of state. When she was returning to finish the last year and a half, 2 years of her sentence, she's a trans woman. They did place her at CRCF for her remaining time. And she and I just had a really frank conversation about what that was like to be a trans woman being housed in almost exclusively male facilities and almost exclusively out of state, in 4 different out of state facilities. So she saw a wide variety of, she had a wide variety of experiences in different systems that treat trans inmates differently. So she essentially said, we've got some improvements to make, and we put a bill together, introduced it to the committee. She came in and met the committee and presented to the committee, I think, a couple hours worth of testimony, and immediately I think there was a reaction of compassion and empathy, and I think wholeheartedly the committee said, yeah, we're going to work on this bill. I'm really proud of Representative Galfetti out of Berrytown, who then continued a relationship with this woman, and again worked really hard to get that bill, and she introduced it on the floor, and her efforts and her advocacy for this bill really helped it pass.
And what difference is it going to make if this bill goes?
So it's a really tough needle to thread here, right? You want, in my world, in the world of higher education, when somebody comes out to me and says, I'm actually trans, these are my pronouns, this is the name I'm using now, it's an automatic, right? Okay, this is how I'm going to treat you, this is what I'm going to refer to you as. The woman who introduced this said it's when you introduce the criminogenic element to that, there are people who misuse and try to get placed in a women's facility for nefarious reasons. Mm-hmm. So you really have to, right, we really kind of bolstered the evaluation period when somebody says, I identify as trans and I want to be placed. So it has some real sort of safety guards in and around the housing placement, and allows somebody to tap the brakes and say, can we hold off just a second until we have a few more conversations or a few more evaluations before we make those conversations. We do that while we're protecting people who do truly identify as trans, and want to get them placed in a facility that feels safe to them.
So there's measures in that, measures during that evaluation period to keep somebody safe if they're in the facility that they don't identify with.
I mean, to me, we've also been trying all along to inculcate best practices throughout our system, and this is just an extension, if you want, of medical or housing best practices. And for me, what was heartening was there was not a partisan division. I did not feel a lot of pushback from the folks who work within the Department of Corrections. There was sort of a desire to do this right. That was really nice to see.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk generally, if there's more on the corrections and institutions. Well, actually, let's circle back to the capital budget, because that is something that you have to pass every 2 years. Or
it's a 2-year budget, and then we adjust it in the second year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are there any big issues here? Does the sort of work from home policy come to play in this capital budget? Because this is the money that we're going to spend on. Is this everything from artwork to
Art and state buildings? Yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about that. What do you want to highlight? You're at the Thanksgiving dinner. You're at family dinner, and you want to highlight. This is what's coming up for Vermont.
I mean, that's the trick, right? It's small to big. It's things that are just a one-off versus ongoing. They're a big long-term project. And so if I'm looking at the capital bill from within the context of the work that we do, longer term, we're looking for a replacement women's facility. We are trying to find a long-term solution for the Bennington Battle Monument, which is falling apart. We are trying to figure out.
They closed it this year.
Sadly, yeah. And the elevator, at least for the time being, is unsafe, and trying to figure out what to do there. The forensic facility that we talked about earlier. And so part of the job is this little, okay, we're doing upgrades to this building. How fast is that project happening? Do we need the money in this fiscal year? Can we push it out another fiscal year? These are the kind of small things. And then all along, you have to bear in mind, here are the larger projects that we're working on. Is that what's actually going to happen? Is there money being set aside for it? How are we going to afford this in future years? And oh, by the way, we may have a part in school construction too. That remains to be seen. Yeah. So I think we are doing an admirable job of keeping the replacement women's facility on people's minds and putting aside some money and doing some planning for it. I think we're doing an admirable job of keeping up with the deferred maintenance that we have throughout all of our other facilities. I think pretty soon, if not now, there are going to be pressures beyond that which we can absorb. And that's where it gets really difficult. That's where you begin prioritizing. And that's, if you view it as a zero-sum game, that's where some folks talk about, like, am I really going to put X ahead of housing? Am I really going to put this monument ahead of schools? And it's trying to figure out how to do everything that you need to do without sort of pushing aside this thing. I don't know, does that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the money that we take out in bonded dollars gets matched from federal dollars in significant ways, especially in and around clean water infrastructure and things like that. So we're always trying to maximize that money. If we're going to get X million dollars from the federal government and it takes this much money from Vermont, should that take priority as well?
Have you seen an impact of changes in what the federal government is going to match?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk about that in any
Oh gosh.
numbers?
Trying to think of the most significant impact we've seen due to the loss of federal money, because most of that is going through the general fund, not the capital fund.
There's also the question of timing and expectations. I don't mean to interrupt. I was hoping to buy you time
Yeah.
to think, but but also, right, these grants that are supposed to be coming, every time we take testimony, it's how sure are you that they're coming? When might that be coming? And that was never a question before, and it is now.
Yeah.
So it's not just a question of the amount, but is it? How? When? Right.
So for now, the women's facility, the potential new women's facility is on hold? It's on
We're going to be looking for land again because
Okay.
it looked like we had settled on a plot of land in, was it Essex or Essex Junction? Yeah. That did not go through. And so I don't want to say
and
that
that's
we're,
not going to be challenged.
I'm not
I don't
sure
think so.
what there
No,
is
I think
to
that's,
challenge
I think
there.
that's
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really important. I want to hit this point a little harder, right? And I'll just use myself as an example. When I came in 2023, I was very much in line with the abolitionists of should we be building any more correctional facilities at all. And then I saw the facility that the women are currently housed in, and it's deplorable. And that was built as a detention facility. It was not even built as a long-term prison. And when you get into that building, the State House, and you start seeing all of these bills that are passing that are only going to increase our carceral population, you realize that this isn't going away.
What are the bills that aren't going to increase our?
I mean, pick anyone from the judiciary on the likelihood that something is now a bigger felony, and attached to that is a bigger prison sentence, and our prison population is increasing.
Yeah, it was surprising to hear that
Yeah.
that was happening. So you have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
buddy up with your friends
So,
in the judiciary
so
to.
yeah. So I don't know. My idealism intersects with that pragmatism of if we don't do something, the women are going to continue to languish in that facility, or we're going to send more men out of state so that we can use a wing of a men's facility to house our women. That is going to happen, and I've seen now 3 different facilities this year, the women's facility, St. Albans, and Springfield. The newest of those facilities was built in 2003, that's Springfield. When you look at that compared to CRCF, it's night and day, and the facility built in 2003 is no longer sort of up to standards of where it possibly could be. So when I think about building a new facility that accommodates the programming that we need to put into that building, Vermont Works for Women, the Vermont Network, Kids Apart, all these CCV, right, trades education, what we could do with a new facility for just programmatic space alone has to happen.
I mean, it makes me wonder when you're talking about the forensics facility and the need for that to be housed outside corrections. Is there a possibility of building a facility that's outside of corrections, that's meeting the needs that both abolitionists are talking about and reformers are talking about?
Is it possible to build?
Yeah, is it
Yeah.
possible to consider, and where would that be housed? Under what?
Well, so back to the Essex problem, right? So I want to, part of my job, I think, is to convince the folks that I align with that it is time to build a new facility. But every time we start talking about this, and it happened with the Justice Involved Youth Facility as well, that we were looking at a space in Virgins, and that got turned down, right? Nobody wants these facilities in their backyard. So we have to really reinvent how we consider these people as our neighbors, and what does it mean to house these people who need temporary assistance or temporary seclusion from the community. How do we do that in a way that is compassionate and keeps dignity at the forefront of how we treat these people? Because right now I don't see a lot of dignity.
Has a really different way of looking at parole
Yep.
and using parole to have a facility without walls, so to
Yep,
speak,
yep.
right? Could you
I mean,
just
part of
talk-
that may be your attitude towards whether people should be physically incarcerated or not. Part of it is just the reality of how much money do we have, how big are our facilities, what do we, how many people can we recruit to be correctional officers? I mean, some of those pragmatic nuts and bolts and fiscal kind of questions are behind parole. They're behind the sorts of people who, if you go back maybe 5 or 10 years, folks were being incarcerated on short sentences, and it was almost a different population. The way that I hear it described to me is like these were folks that were often had a problem with alcohol, whereas now you see much more harder drugs. And so I think I'm sort of losing the train of thought here. Yeah, actually, I'd like to volley back for a second.
Well, what we're getting into the weeds, and what you're pointing out is the fact that your committee is dealing with some pretty complicated issues that we're not going to figure out in this.
And they're not going to go away,
in the
right?
next 10
And they're going to
minutes,
need
yeah.
money to
Yeah,
fix.
yeah.
And the
And
way we
where
do
that
that,
takes place, if it's
yeah.
going to take place in corrections as part of the Agency of Human Services or outside corrections.
Oh, and I'm picking up the thread now. Yeah, we've chosen not to pursue, in terms of our correctional facilities, those sort of lower level offenses, the kind of nuisance offenses. And I think there is a part of our society, and I think you hear it in rhetoric from the governor and occasionally from our new commissioner of corrections, that the public is fed up, we need to get tougher on crime. We're tired of catch and release. Sarah George's name is often used. Whether or not that's a advisable policy, it's also essentially physically impossible with the facilities that we have and the money that we have to serve them and the people that we have to work in them, So there are these two issues, one the moral and one the practical.
Yeah.
That's
And
where I was going.
yeah, great. Corrections, like education, like healthcare, they're places where the canary in the coal mine, and we're seeing where society is sort of breaking apart, right? Potentially. So let's just talk a little bit about generally your experience. I mean, not to be, gloom and doom about it, but generally, what's your experience been of the legislative session so far? I know the Ed bill has been a big piece of, been calling on people's attention, and there's a question whether the governor is going to veto the budget.
Yep.
So what's your experience with all the rest of your colleagues?
I think from my perspective, and I'll try to keep it short again so I'm not being a pig, Troy, but the elbows feel a little bit sharper this time around, and I think that's partly the federal money going away. I think that's partly seeing these year-over-year increases in taxation. I think it's partly when resources truly get short, right? There is this greater competition. And so I think there's also a way of talking about it, and I think there's a lot of good that Phil Scott has done as governor, but when I hear him deliver his speeches to the legislature, there's almost a pitting of Chittenden County against the rest of the state, of rural against urban, and there's almost like a malevolence attributed to those folks. And the trick is we are all in this together. There's a statewide education finance system. It's in my interest to support folks in other towns too. I wish there were more of an acknowledgement of that as opposed to the kind of political calculus that this is going to be terrible and I don't want to be the one holding the bag at the end. And so when he came out with a statement that he was going to veto the legislation passed out of the House before we had even considered all the amendments that were going to be applied to the bill, that's pretty cynical to me.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to what Brian has said, and I worry about what the end of the session is going to look like. I'm not optimistic, and the script has already, it seems to me, written to some degree. Even as far as how much are we are buying down property taxes again, whether that's by half or by full, right? That means next year, after everybody gets elected again, property taxes are going to spike again next year because we are not going to solve the funding issue in the next 6 weeks, right? So we're going to buy down the property tax increases again. We're not giving any meaningful consideration to an income-based sort of way of raising taxes. We are looking at new tax brackets on the top 1% of Vermonters. We are looking at possibly considering a wealth tax, but by and large, it's smoke and mirrors at this point, and I worry. I really worry about the brinksmanship that is going to define the end of this session.
I think also, I'm thinking back to a previous conversation that you had about a month ago, one of your interviews that was with, or maybe it was a different interviewer actually, but it was with Bridget Burkhart and Carol Odie of the Ways and Means Committee, and reference was made to Act 173 from a few years ago, where the funding mechanism for special ed students was changed to a census block grant. And there was a way of doing that intelligently such that the money would stretch far enough, but instead it was rammed through really quickly without the multi-tiered systems of support in place that would allow for that to happen. I fear the same thing is going to happen now when we're talking about a foundation formula for student funding and the consolidation of school governance that we hope is going to happen. What's being proposed by the legislature right now is this kind of slow, let's bend the cost curve, let's talk about shared services. I think if you want to see the sort of savings that is being promised by the governor, you almost have to cut blindly without looking at the results that are achievable in terms of educational outcomes. That's the only way that you get to the level of savings as quickly as we're talking about. It's not by doing it intelligently in a way that's good for education.
And this is going to have an impact on labor. That's the only thing I see coming out of this.
Have an impact on
labor, on the teachers,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, we are. Yeah, I was talking to a teacher just yesterday as I was looking at my, trying to get my signatures for the new ballot. Long-serving teacher, top of her pay scale, and isn't ready to stop teaching, but at the same time said, I may have to retire because I'm a chunk of money for my school district because of how long I've been here. And I'm not ready to be done teaching yet. And that's what I worry we're setting up, this dilemma where we blame the teachers for, and it's not. We just don't invest in education to the degree that we need to.
Well, and also when you're talking about teacher pay, there is this notion that there's this inequity in how teachers are compensated right now, where again, the rhetoric was dividing the urban from the rural. First of all, not paying attention to the cost of living disparity between the two places. Maybe you need to be paid more here to work here. But second of all, there's no way on earth that you're going to be saving money overall if you're elevating those who are paid too little right now up to the level of those who are making more, right? There's this sort of like magical thinking involved, promises that cannot be kept.
What does success look like to you at the end of the session?
Goodness.
I'm going to go back to how proud I am of our committee on the policy work that we did get out of our committee, and it looks like has a good chance through the Senate. So I'm optimistic about that. Of my 4-year serving, this is the year where we have done the most significant policy work for the Department of Corrections, and I'm proud of that. I'm not going to go back to my pessimism of how I think the session is going to end, but that's hanging there for me.
Will it end before June?
I'm having that conversation with UVM right now because we have to do this dance of when are you coming back, Troy? Because we got to get the paperwork rolling. And I've heard May 22nd. I've heard May 29th. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be a lot of hurry up and wait for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll see what we get done.
Yeah, so I think we're out in May. I'm still making plans for late May, although they are going to be fungible, changeable if necessary. In terms of success, I've been appreciating over my 4 years, I've sort of changed too, that there are these different facets to being a legislator. And so success in terms of my committee work, I think we've done good work passing out bills from the House. I'd like to see them come to fruition and be passed. In terms of the body as a whole, we need to make some sort of progress on what's happening with education finance. I think we're going to because we have to, and everybody at least agrees on that much. But the final one is your service to the people of your community and making them feel, and not just feel, tying them to their government and offering them service. And to the degree that I can keep people believing that we're all striving in the same direction and trying to serve them properly, then to some degree that's what success looks like. After this, I've got a public forum at the South Burlington Library that we do every month with other legislators. That's usually very civil and appreciated, you know. I hope to continue that and not be Washington and not be the nation.
Yeah. What is the, we're going to close in a minute or two here, but what is it that you're hearing from constituents? You know, you mentioned talking to this teacher, you mentioned, what are the things that are filling up your, what are the comments filling up your inbox or your ears?
This session, it was the wealth tax
Yep.
and the income tax. That's
Pass it or don't pass it?
pass it.
Pass it.
Okay.
Yeah. Overwhelmingly, that's the topic that I got the most traction from my committee, from my constituents. Yeah. And then different things here and there. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
do have a lot of abolitionists, prison abolitionists in my district who continue to disagree with me on whether or not we should be building a new prison. So those are always fun conversations.
Yeah, I would agree that the thing I've heard the most about, at least lately, has been this notion of a wealth tax. I think in terms of the work that we do as a committee, what I heard most about was our interaction with federal authorities and what, our interaction with ICE can and should look like. And I think running through all of it is this notion that Vermont is still somehow unique and different, and can we please preserve that as everything else is happening in the nation.
And 181, I got a lot on that too. The changing in how we use and zone for land use.
Developing tier 1, tier 2, tier 3.
Outside of, I mean,
Yeah, that's true.
In Chittenden County, my job is to convince, and Burlingtonians is to convince us to welcome more density here in Burlington. But I did get a lot of outreach on 181, and I'm happy to see House leadership listen to that. Yeah,
Yep.
I was proud of that.
Great. Thank you both for being here. If there are any last comments, or let folks know how they can get in touch with you, this is your time.
I guess last comment is a kudos to you guys. I did go back and watch some of the previous interviews that have been done, and I like this idea, and I don't know if it was intentional, I'm assuming it was, where you have folks from the same committee, and that way, if it weren't that specific, you'd end up talking about the same subjects over and over, which is important, but you really get to get deeper into the policy side of things that way, so well done. As for what to leave people with, I think remember that we are a citizen legislature, and I've seen around the table with people from all sorts of different political stripes that we're genuinely trying to make this a better place for everybody. And if we're not doing the thing that you want specifically, it's not out of some malevolence. We're trying.
Yeah, I guess my plea going into election season is to be kind to the candidates. I really want us to get away from all the negative politicking that I see surrounding these debates. I'm fortunate, like I said at the beginning, to live in a district where there are so many people who could just step into this role and serve our population well. And to Brian's point, that we are citizens. We're not professional politics. Be kind as you are looking for the change that you want to see, and looking to the people who are running to initiate those changes on your behalf. Just kindness, through the election season.
Great. Well, thank you both for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Which camera? I'm over here. Thank you all for watching. You can watch this program. You keep the channel on, or you can watch other programs like this at our YouTube channel, YouTube.com/Town Meeting TV. Thank you very much, and be well.